Nancy Mithlo, who is very gracious to come down here. And I just want to say she is the person to talk to about publishing because she has been so prolific. And she's launched this project with Laura Evans, took it over. So this is a collaboration. It's a new textbook. So all these have come out recently. This is a journal that she guest edited. So I'm really deeply grateful that she came here today. And Dr. Nancy Mithlo is Chiricahua Apache. She's a professor of gender studies and serves as a faculty advisory committee for American Indian Studies at the University of California in Los Angeles. Her curatorial work has resulted in 9 exhibitions on the occasion of the Venice Biennale in Venice, Italy. Among her publications, she recently wrote Knowing Native Arts from the University of Nebraska Press. She edited Making History, so here, my visuals. She edited Making History, IAIA Museum of Contemporary Native Arts from the University of New Mexico Press in 2020, and then this wonderful journal. And I have to say, I'm a very slow reader. I breezed through Knowing Native Arts because Nancy is an excellent writer. You can write about art history and also be a good writer that cares about your audience. So Nancy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, America. Can everyone hear me? The sound is good? Great. So I want to first start by just thanking First American in the Arts and also America. I recall going to a first planning meeting. Maybe it was at your mom's house, it was at someone's house, and just to see what has been accomplished over the past few years, it's just thrilling for me. I'm speaking to you today from Los Angeles. It's the homeland of the Tongva and the Gabrielino peoples. And I just wanted to start by saying how kind of overwhelmed I am by being amongst all of you. We had a moment when we were setting up early this morning to test the tech. And you know what? It made me think about when we go out on the dance grounds at ceremony, we had this line of women and you're all kind of, rooting each other on, hey, you look good, or, put your shawl up a little higher, or, you're whispering and giggling. And it's this like wonderful embracive high. So I felt that this morning. And I got to say, I don't remember feeling that prior to any of these sort of Zoom worlds we've been occupying. So I think that says a lot for what you've created, America, and all of you who are here today. So I've got a talk in which I purposely made it sort of very broad, and I've got some ways that I plan to sort of break that down. But let me first maybe start with Heather. I'm going to do a little shout out family-wise as well, and forward my role as a mother. So I've been in this field for a long time, like many of you. I have an adult daughter. She wants to work in a museum. And I hear myself saying out of my own mouth, oh, hon, don't do it. What are you thinking? So how can that be? I mean, I was brought into this field because my tribal chairwoman, Mildred Cleghorn, called my father on the telephone. And it was in the days where they had the telephone on the wall and he answered it. And she sent me off to work for the tribe. She sent me off to get credentials. She sent me off on projects. And so I feel this responsibility to my core, and I teach that to my students as well. And so I maybe just take some of the comments that I'm making with that tenderness in mind. I really have some tough talk that I want to move through today with you. And I'll just start by saying that this is my premise, is that after generations of scholarly efforts, Native arts as a field, it's still marginalized and trivialized. And by this, I'm speaking specifically in academic writing, academic professional roles. So I want to, throughout this talk, kind of remind the listener that that's where I situate myself. So what does it mean that our inequities have become normalized? What does that mean? And I'm going to come back to that. Our inequities have become normalized. My training is as a cultural anthropologist. That's where all the stuff was. I wanted to go into the collections. And I think what I learned from that is this value of finding patterns. And so collectively, I'm going to call for us to think about what these patterns are, and especially over time. And I'm going to start with a quote by Vine Deloria Jr. You can find this interview. It's notoriously hard to find the exact date for it. I want to say it's the early 1970s, in which he speaks to absolute conflict as an organizing principle. And if you want to look for this, I can put it in the chat later, but it's Words and Place, a conversation with Vine Deloria Jr. And here he goes. This is what he says. Well, if I had to do it over again, I'd take an entirely different approach to a great many things. See, I didn't realize until a couple of years ago the degree to which non-natives are bound into their own cultural worldview. I thought that there were a lot of avenues leading in and leading out, and you could kind of draw them through that. But I say there's really no way to do that. What you really have to plan to do is attack the fundamental premises, the way they look at the world, in order to even begin to communicate. And so guys, this was 50 years ago. And I still think that we've got this struggle with communication and worldview. And I want us to be collectively smarter about how we're going to approach this. And so, you know, Vine in this conversation closes by saying, what we've got to do is develop a generation of very well-trained, well-educated Indians who can tear social science to pieces, really introduce all kinds of new questions and break up that mindset as much as possible. And so that's what I was reared on. I was reared on these words. I wanted to do this work. My tribal chairwoman, my Vine Deloria, I'd never met him before, but so follow him. And so I think I was thinking, I have this delusion in my own thoughts that I could change things. You know, I could do that. And I want to harken back to what Heather's just come off of saying, is that it really is we. This has got to be a we effort. And so in thinking about, though, my own kind of delusions, I thought about a 12-point program. So I'm presenting you with 12 points today. And I got there by thinking about, you know, other kind of patterns. And my mind landed upon the 12-step program for addiction recovery. And I was looking at a line, and the line is, in Al-Anon, we learned we didn't cause the alcoholism in our lives, we can't control it, and we can't cure it. And I started thinking, under decolonialism, we learned that we didn't cause the colonialism in our lives, we can't control it, and we can't cure it. And so a lot of my personal efforts in academia and with my students and with my writing, you know, a lot of them have been aimed at this premise in our mind that we could somehow change the status quo. And I'm not saying stop doing that, because some of you that may be your path, but I'm saying, let's think about what's productive. And if we can track 50 years of the same kind of strategy and we don't see the kind of movement that we want to do, then the problem is in our own minds. And how can we change our own orientation to be more effective for our communities? So here, I'm going to start walking you through the 12-point program. Oh, also, I found out there was a 12 socket wrench kind of tool. So think about this as a tool. These are I always like to say I have a tool belt on. These are my tools. Number one, there's not one truth. And here, I'll just confess that BIPOC confuses me. Someone asked me what I thought about it. I didn't even know what it meant. It had to be explained to me. So I just want to bring to our collective attention that multiculturalism is often a common tactic to avoid addressing specific harms. So in our rush to decolonize, there's this impulse to find a solution. And with 574 plus tribes, many unrecognized tribes, these generalizations can become detrimental. And so I'm questioning this idea of a collective value of the indigenous in academia. And I'm asking, is this a compromised position? And you know, this could change, guys. When I tell you this stuff, it's what I'm thinking. This is the luxury of academia. We get to kind of free float our thoughts and revisit them, hopefully. So this is where I'm sitting now, is this idea of being specific about region, tribe, time period. I want us to consider the group show. Is it productive? Now, I've curated group shows before, many of you have. I don't mean to diminish the value and the importance of this work, but I'm asking, is it serving us, and in what ways is it serving us? So if we must generalize, and again, here's my Anthro 101 training, then build an argument based upon an established multi-tribal platform. So for example, the Institute of American Indian Arts, the Native American Indigenous Studies Association, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the California Indian Basket Weavers Association, the Indian Relocation Act, etc. So this idea of generalizing, do it on a platform in which you feel like you've got legs. In addition, due to massive fraud, folks are adopting Indigenous identities as a general category, and it's caused a lot of confusion. And I know America's going to speak to this, but here's my favorite line about that. Realize there are unreliable narrators. Do what academics do your research. Okay, I've got to keep galloping on. Number 2, find patterns. Look at what arguments have been made in the past and which arguments we are still making today. So these tropes such as tradition versus modern, we are still here, not a stereotype. These are not sufficient platforms to either produce or interpret Native arts, but a regressive category of inquiry that has over the past 3 generations of Native art scholarships not truly served us. And really maybe even not functional. And so by functional, I mean, there's a willfully ignorant audience that will remain willfully ignorant. I did some work with a cognitive scientist, Alexander Sherman, and you can find it on my website. It's called Seeing American Indians, where we looked at this thing called an entrance narrative in museum studies. And it means that visitors will go into an exhibit with a predetermined mindset, and that they really just want that confirmed in the museum, and that they leave really having had that predetermined mindset reinforced. And so I think we really need to be experimental to think about what is happening when people see, view, and read about art. And there's several other disciplines that are doing this kind of work that's really exciting. So basically, I'm urging, make complex art, make difficult arguments, do not lower the bar for audience expectations. Be brilliant. Number 3, more does not equal better. So to say we must produce more scholars, have more curators, more exhibit, as if in a game of numbers, underestimates both the resiliency of colonial systems of power and the intent of these systems. The exertion of power inherent in the grand master narrative that both commerce, and I mean by this galleries, and the educational platform of the museum, both systems that thrive on purchasing prestige, are not primarily invested in the sovereignty and health of Native nations. So number 4, your job is not to fix the museum enterprise or academic disciplines that demand a rapprochement between disciplines. It's okay if systems of power fail. So even if creatively you're moving into that, maybe you work for a museum. I'm not saying that that's not valid. I'm just saying, let your mind go there. What if that didn't exist and that was not your aim to prop that system up? So if I'm proposing museums as an institution are irretrievable as spaces of achieving social equity, why are Native arts professionals, including writers, continuing trying to redeem them? And I've written an article on this called We've All Been Colonized. It was about 10 years ago. Native communities did not create the problem of colonial discourse and dehumanizing collection practices, and they should not be expected to fix these problems by way of temporary exhibits, interventionist practices, advisory committees, student curated exhibits, temporary and sporadic purchase practices, summer internships, guest curatorships, mentorships, or feel-good educational programming. I am advocating power sharing on significant levels. And I think this is something that Heather alluded to in terms of Board of Trustees positions. Number 5, academia will not save you. Think of the academy as a particular social location that will enable you to gain skills in writing, rhetoric, diplomacy, and even how to navigate negative human traits such as jealousy, greed, or delusion. As a student, your task is not to change the academy or to make it better. Your task is to gain your skills and move on as quickly as possible. Any time you spend on rehabilitating the academy can better be spent rewriting your papers, researching, and writing. Let the middle managers and administrators whose job it is to build social equity in the academy earn their salary doing so. The academy should be your bus stop. Your investment in time to rehabilitate the academy will not significantly advance you, but your writing will significantly advance you. Number 6, be clear on the intent and purpose of your work. Know how to answer if someone asks, how did you come to do this work? Why do you do this work? Remind yourself what your core contribution is and use this as a gauge at every point where you decide where you want to devote your skills and energy. You are beholden to your own path, not a path that an institution tells you to follow. Your skill set you gain is your own personal and perhaps best kept private business. Why you're in the game, no one else needs to know. You go in, you get what you need. Seek and take opportunities you have identified. You do not need to justify or explain your path. So focus, focus, focus. It's so easy to get distracted. I mean, myself, I was taught that if someone asks you to do something and you can, you know, that it's your responsibility. I've gotten into so many projects that way, and some of them have been beautiful and some of them have been a train wreck. Of course, it depends who's asking you, So in this, I'm saying if the Academy asks you to do something, know in your heart what it is you want to do. And here it is, number 7, self-knowledge is key to being a good writer. And this is a lifetime pursuit. I'm sorry, there's no point of arrival, guys. The more you feel comfortable in yourself and in your role, the stronger a writer you will become. So I often do something I call the thesis whisperer, where I can have a student come in. And it used to happen, of course, in my office hours. I've had so many students cry in my office hours, and I promise I don't make them cry. I just try to dig in to figure out what is going on with them that their writing is suffering, right? And sometimes that is, you know, really digging a little bit further about why they're in school and what they hope to accomplish. So when I see dependent clauses, run-on sentences, sentence fragments, lack of paragraph structure, even misspelling, I'm just going to put this out here. I think it is really related to poor self-regard or insecurity or something unresolved. So if you regard yourself highly, you will ensure that your goal as a writer is excellence. If you regard yourself highly, you will welcome constructive feedback and edits. If you regard yourself highly, you will even allow yourself to fail. Failure is a part of learning. So number 8, if you're not failing on a regular basis, you're not fully invested, or your mentors are not fully invested. And I'm going to sit on the mentorship part here. Too many Native students are not engaged with seriously in their writing because their mentors, those responsible for their assessments, fail to engage their students deeply or meaningfully. Some of this reluctance may involve white guilt or fragility. It is not the fault of the student. There's a systematic benefit of maintaining a status quo and not challenging Native students or those students invested in decolonial practices. There's less risk and more work involved in poorly mentoring students that are directly challenging systems of inequality. Failing up is a symptom of status quo instruction. So in this one, I have to always remind my students, edits equal love. And I also just want to add an awareness of disabilities. Native students are also passed on when what was required was an assessment of learning styles and proper supports and accommodations to excel as a scholar. And I find so many students in my class that have just never had the benefit of having their learning styles assessed to know how they can shine best as a thinker and a writer. Number 9, no one can give you a voice and no one can take away your voice. So whenever I see that give a voice to, we're giving a voice to, I'm just like, how paternalistic. So I'm just going to tell you, like, proactively network, build community, create, write, curate, edit, journal, exhibit, blog, TikTok. Your everyday manifestation of culture is insurance of your future and the future of the field. A reactive stance will not grow your practice nearly as efficiently. Remember to have fun, seek joy, and protect yourself against energy vampires. I learned that one from my daughter. So again, you know, think about what your path is, what you want to accomplish, and just go for it. Just be relentless. Be bulldogged about it. Number 10, be aware of systematic oppression. This one really gets me. Racism often functions in the power of pathologizing the individual. And if you want to search this academically, individualized deficit theory is what you're going to search for. While overlooking historic and ongoing colonial harms, those who exert power as museum professionals, nonprofit institutions, or scholars in the academy, meaning you simply have a professional position, myself included. Be vigilant that your assessments are cognizant of a lack of resources, lack of journals devoted to Native arts, image banks, fellowships, publication subventions, endowed professorships, availability of faculty, publication series. Actively mentor by including students in every aspect of your work, including research, writing, public speaking engagements, and funding opportunities. Students, actively ask for these opportunities and actively call out the lack of infrastructure in the Native arts field. So I get asked to do talks all the time, and my big go-to now is just to say, I'm not going to do it unless a student can come. And often the institution will say, well, we don't have money for that. And I'll say, well, then I'll pay. And you know what? The institution always finds the money. So I think we have more power than we think. And if we ask for things, again, in just a very like, I deserve this kind of fashion, who knows? It's worth trying. Number 11, strive for excellence and avoid complacency. So there's this tendency I see in our field to pick the same 3 artists to feature without regard for their training, their relevance to a curatorial concept, or the representative nature of their placement in the field. And I can say that about our writers as well. Those of you who are writing using Native authors, there's a handful, and there's so many brilliant minds out there. So often, I'm afraid, our field veers dangerously towards a popularity contest that draws from youth adoration, trendiness, and a lack of critical analysis of the work. And I mean written work or artistic works. So producers and authors, be a rock star, have a long-term strategy and stick to it. Demand more of yourself and others. So, you know, maybe even, I'm just going to push it a little further and say, don't ask, just insist, you know, this is what I deserve, and stay resilient. And again, if you recall, what I'm starting with is this whole idea about how our inequities have become normalized. So I'm trying to push against that. So number 12, last one, guys, reject exceptionalism arguments. Native arts writing deserves the same rigorous appraisal and inclusion as other writing. Call out the switching criteria exercise, meaning rejection of work because it is art or craft or American art or global art or postmodern art or modern art. And by this, I mean like, well, we can't write about that because we're only doing American art here, you know, or we can't write about that because that's craft, this is art. You know what I'm talking about. This is a tricky move. We all know these moves, so we've just got to call them out collectively. If you're a scholar, do the scholarly work required to be conversant and fluent on current literature in the field, just like any other discipline. This is not an intervention. This is not even radical. Native arts simply inherently belong. There's no good fight. The primary premise that our field is always a struggle is a colonial move, okay? And so I want us to be awake to that. And I'll just close by saying, work together, claim your goals, your own goals, be excellent. And I look forward to reading and writing with you, reading your work. And I just want to give another shout out to Heather. I love this, Heather, when you said, lead with love. Can't go wrong there. So I'm ready to take questions now. I'm really excited to be in conversation with you. It's still kind of morning time here, so I'm fresh. Hopefully my brain's working. And let's see where we go next.
I hope I speak for more than just myself when I say that I am sweating. I feel like you called out so many young writers like myself that tend to rely on the same artists, the same writers, as you said. And I so appreciate, you know, the constructive criticism. I think that is an act of love. And it's not one that we always get to see as students and as emerging professionals. There's a lot of pats on the back, but the criticism is important too.
Well, thanks for that feedback, because I got to tell you, I'm getting a lot of feedback from my students, and I teach on the graduate and the undergraduate level, and they'll say like, I've never received edits like this in my life. And they're kind of in shock because I literally will dig in and be like, IT''S is not a possessive, you know, you should learn this. Like, you know, you're a UCLA student. What are you doing? You know, I really kind of just work with them. But I dig deep because I think otherwise it's not worth it. I feel like we're all going through a charade, right? You know, I mean, the work will not be meaningful unless we engage it on a meaningful level. And I think that, you know, because our field has been trivialized, then it's just sort of this like pass through game. And really, I want to engage. You know, I start to tell stories when I'm on here, so forgive me, my students have gotten used to it. But I was to be a basketball player in high school. And I was just really aggressive about grabbing that basketball and hitting the floor with it. I had, you know, I had a brother, I was a tomboy, and I think I still kind of do that. The whole trick was, how long can I stay in the game before I'm fouled out? And how many shots I can make. And I feel like I'm doing that right now. You know, I like to grab that ball and just like, let's throw it to the ground. It's fun.
Yeah, let's stay on this topic for a moment, but for now, audience members, please put in your questions. We have just a few minutes with Nancy, and I know that you're probably dying to ask things after what was a sort of provocative list. So let's start there. I was just reading this week, your book, Knowing Native Art.
Thank you.
And I have a couple impressions. The first is something that we're already talking about, which is, you know, this sort of tendency, especially the younger, more emerging people amongst us, to use the same artists and the same writers. And then the second is, I want you to briefly touch on philanthropy just a little bit. It's a big part of your book, but I think it's important and something that we don't always appreciate as writers.
No, thank you for asking. Should I just dive in with philanthropy?
Yeah, let me get specific about the other one and then you can answer both and
Sure.
I'll your questions. So the one I wanted to mention is I felt called out in a good way when you spoke about visual art writers' tendency to over rely on terms like survivance and sovereignty and how those broad terms don't always serve visual analysis. Could you speak more on both of those things?
Yeah, well, of course, our beloved writers in the field have authored those terms, Gerald Visner and Jolene Ricard. And so just to start by saying, I hold them in the highest regard and they are my mentors. So this is not a rejection of that. I think it's just a first step. Again, we're in this rush. We're like, let's decolonize really quickly, you know, as if it was something you could just fix, like with just a turn of a wrench, you know, like we're going to fix this darn thing. I'm going to use this word all the way through my article. Whew, done. Wow, that was hard, you know, and instead of being kind of exploratory. And so again, I want people, if you can, to look at that study that I did with the cognitive scientist, Professor Sherman. And we hosted this at the Autry Museum, and it used a lot of different kind of measurements. But at the end of the day, our recommendation was to basically be curious and to say as a first measure, I have no idea what's going on here. And that's hard for us to do. It's hard as students, it's hard as professors, it's hard, you know, in any situation, like we're damn America, you know, we're supposed to know and fix and be and do. And, you know, I think being in that space of uncertainty, any kind of liminal space of, I don't know what's going on here. And I'm just going to sit with that for a while and see what comes up, you know, is very valuable. It's so valuable. It seems like a luxury, but if you're in the academy, this is what you're supposed to do, right? This is part of, I think, what's happening in higher education is that we've got to get in and get out and get a job, right? And what happened to this idea of you find who you are, you find what you can do well, you trust yourself, and you grow these skill sets, and then you move into the world and do that, right? We're always in a rush to get to an end product instead of having that exploratory space. And that's what I mean about failing as well. You know, like unless you exceed your own expectations of yourself, then you never know what you're capable of, right? And you only know if you exceed if it goes really badly in some way, shape, or form. And I've gone really badly. I want everyone else to like go out there and try things on that aren't safe. Philanthropy, I'll go ahead. Is it okay if I move into that? So, okay, again, contact sport. Guys, I was going to put this in my points and I decided not to, so I'm glad this came up. Find a vulnerable situation. I'll just go ahead and tell a family joke here. Okay, so my mom was an East Tennessee girl and just lovely in so many ways. My dad, you know, the Chiricahua Apache guy, he was an engineer, and she was an educator. And my mother used to say, I found your daddy when he was in a vulnerable position. I just love it. So listen, you guys go out there and find institutions that are in a vulnerable position. And they are all vulnerable right now, okay? They are all vulnerable. And find that the latest like huge faux pas that's blown up in their face, because folks haven't invested in our field. They just keep making massive mistakes. You know, they're just fireworks going every day. I mean, I can't even keep up with the fireworks that are happening out there. So why does that happen? You know, it's because they haven't invested in the field. They haven't done the study of what works and what doesn't work. If we could have Mellon, whoever's out there, you know, fund us to find out what the heck is happening in our own field. You know, I mean, who's getting the degrees? Where are they getting those degrees? Where are they publishing? Where are they pulling their money down from? I tell my students all the time, find someone you want to be like, or you want to have their opportunities, and steal everything on their CV, right? If they got a Terra Foundation fellowship, you want a Terra Foundation fellowship. Who wrote for that? Who reviewed that? Like, dig in and get in there. I teach grad students. People think it's rude. I found out even in Los Angeles, to be able to say, if someone says, I'm on this internship, you know, I will just immediately say, who funded it? Where did you get it? When's the deadline? Who wrote for you? You know, and people are sort of taken aback. I'm like, no, we all need this information. Like, we've been taught, again, this colonialism in our head that we're competing against each other. No, I mean, the way this works in the field is that, you know, we know the rules of the game. We know where the chess pieces are moving. Our field's small enough that we can just call each other up, you know, half the time, you know, tell each other, this is a huge opportunity. Who should I ask to write for? So that's another part, is getting mentors under your belt. Finding people who can advise you. But anyway, philanthropy, I don't know. I've done a lot of getting money. I've done a lot of giving money. It's another system. So again, Anthropology 101, figure out that system, right? Get in there, volunteer to review their grants. They always need grants reviewers, guys, on all levels. Volunteer, whether it's the NEA, the NEH, First Americans in the Art, Native American Culture Foundation, whoever it is, like, dig in there and get in, advise them, follow them, track them, volunteer for them. And then you'll see exactly what works and what doesn't work. If someone's gotten the funding you won't, ask them for their application, ask them what they did, how they did it, get the details down. Here's another thing, and I'll stop here because I could talk all day about philanthropy. It's kind of like, again, a contact sport for me. Read what they want and steal their words from them. If they're like excellence in the arts, then you're going to put excellence in the arts throughout your proposal. If they're into global, then you put global throughout their proposal. Steal their words and give them back to them, and they'll feel comfortable with you. They'll be like, oh, she understands us. She knows our language, right? So again, vulnerability, we can really make a lot of gains there.
Thank you for being so candid. I hope all the students are taking notes. This is invaluable advice I wish I had a long time ago. We have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to do 2 questions at once again.
Sure.
For the first bit of a housekeeping thing, the audience members really into your 12-step list and are wondering, is that a resource that is available somewhere, or will it be available somewhere?
I can clean up my notes and give them to America, and I'm sure they can be available somewhere. And if anyone wants to steal this, take it and steal it. It's fine. There's no copyright. Again, let's just like run with things. We don't have a lot of time. I'm getting worn out here, you know, like, so I'm expecting this next generation to move fast and quick and efficiently.
And then a second question is, somebody mentions that, you know, you said students shouldn't waste their time trying to fix academia, just focus on the writing, on the research. On the flip side of that, do you have any words for tenured professors who perhaps are in more of a position to do so?
Oh, I think tenured professors can do whatever the heck they want to do. I mean, where does this position exist in the world? It exists nowhere else, where they actually cannot fire you. Oh my gosh. I mean, I can't even think of anywhere else this exists, right? So your path is your own path, you know, you get to do, I always say for folks, you know, who are like my colleagues, and I was taught this by, actually, I think it's Amy Lone Tree, who said, like, what we need to be doing is what no one else can do. That's our contribution. And so I think if you're coming at this from a tenured position, just say, what is it that I have? And within the time frame you have it in, guys, I'm turning 60 and, you know, I'm just like, boom, I'm out of the game. I'm not even, you know, like grad students, I'm at the end of my rope because I've been in here fighting a long time, right? If I have 5 or 6 years to go right now, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? It's not rehabilitate an institution. No, it's what I only uniquely can do. And that is working with my students. It's like getting out those articles. It's like solving some of these problems like we're solving today, right? The institution will survive, right? Will our communities survive? You know, we've got COVID. We're going to have a huge economic problem coming up ahead of us. You know, our communities are in crisis. So yeah, do what you need to do. And if you're worried about serving on committees or changing things at your university, do a bad job of it. I'm sorry, I learned that from a friend. Like if you're on that committee, just do a fabulously bad job. It's what everyone said when Zoom came out. They're just like, they're gonna start cutting our salaries and we're all just gonna be Zooms. And so everyone online was like, do Zoom terribly, fail. They will never ask you to do that work again.
Yeah, so we're somehow already almost out of time, but Brendan, if you want to ask like maybe a quick question and then we got to move on to the next speaker, but hopefully we can keep having this conversation throughout the day.
Yeah, we definitely have time also for some of the other questions that came up that I think get into the weeds a little bit more of some of the topics that you raised. It was, as Taylor said, really eye-opening and motivating to listen to you and to hear these very so workable ideas that we can institute immediately into an emerging writing practice. So I think it might, if I would like to ask you about something you said toward the beginning of your talk, which about these everyday manifestations of culture, every opportunity you have to sort of engage in a cultural mode with society, with community. Can you talk a little bit to that, where you think the power in that lies in terms of forms of communication, in honing a writing practice, in all these different potential ways of communicating with a broader audience? How do you feel about the way technology is influencing our cultural communications?
You know, I think it all goes back to kind of self-regard, really. You know, I, like Heather, when I started out, I could not even speak. I mean, I would go to a conference and really have not breathed enough into my chest that I would spit out a question and fall back on my chair and have to like hyperventilate to get it out. And so I think the relationality, you know, is us looking after each other. I mean, just like before we started this morning, I got a phone call, I got texts from people saying, hey, I'm just thinking about you, love you, go out there and do it, you know. And that was just so important for me to hear, you know, for us to really check in on each other. The technology part, I don't know, do you want to maybe tell me more about what you were thinking there?
Well, I'm just interested in some of the ways that there's a professor at University of California, Santa Cruz, who's been working on the idea of the selfie as a form of image making, and then the way that that's then shared, you know, very openly, very easily, publicly. Just the idea of how these forms of communication are impacting our understanding of culture and the cultural object. And since you brought up some of these forms of social media like TikTok and Instagram or Twitter, all of these ways that we can share our cultural production and thoughts about culture, I was just curious, you know, to sort of follow that a little bit further, and you know, what could that mean for building community or building relationships that even further afield?
Okay, so I'm going to do two things. I know we're running out of time. So thing number one is I'm going to take, for me personally, I don't think about it too much. I'm just really busy in my brain and I got a lot to do. And so I just kind of grab at whatever is happening in my world. Plus I have two grandchildren. And so I'm just like, it puts you in the now moment in a way, and it doesn't really matter. I'm just doing. And so, I made a friend, Judy, who's at the corner a block away where I walk the dog, because I called her out of her front yard and talked with her. And my daughter, who's lived here much longer than I have, we're in the same house. It's like, Mom, we know everyone on the block now. And it's because under COVID, I stop everyone on the street and I actually converse with them, and they're kind of surprised. But like, we know each other. We're passing fried chicken and bread and everything over the fence. We're having late night smokes and wine in the front yard. It's just luxurious. And I would not have had that unless there was COVID, right? So I'll give that harken out to like the real embodied thing. And of course, we're 6 feet distance. We're wearing our mask. We're being safe. So the other one, what your comment made me think about, I had the honor of speaking for the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. John Blakinger, who is an art history professor, did a series of Terra Foundation lectures. I want to say he was at the University of Oxford. And this is actually his premise, is that most of the artwork that we're seeing, we're consuming it digitally. And what does that mean for arts practice? So I could like drop these series of talks. They're phenomenal, guys. I teach monuments, and a lot of them have to do with monuments. They have to do with controversy. You're going to love these talks. They're just, and he is so well spoken. Oh my gosh. I'm kind of goofy. I've learned to embrace my inner goofy. I tell stories, I ramble, I show images, I do whatever kind of comes that day. His lectures are just like a fine-tuned car. Oh my gosh. So I'll share that. And I think he has some really well-developed thoughts about how technology is impacting our arts writing.
Wonderful. I appreciate that.
In the chat. I think Andrea Carlson speaks for everyone when she says, I want to have wine and smokes with Nancy. Like, that's where all the attendees and the audience is at right now. I know that's how I feel. Fortunately, we do have more speakers, so we have to keep it moving. But I want to thank you so much for your candidness and for getting everyone fired up.
Oh, thank you. This has been a great honor, and shout out to everyone who's on this call. And again, I look forward to what you write.